Welcome to Honey in the Rock, a podcast for women. Here we believe in finding sweetness even in the most difficult places. Each story you will hear is a testament to God's faithfulness, showing that even in the wilderness, He provides honey from the rock. Join us as we listen to real, raw, and redemptive stories that remind us of God's goodness and grace no matter what life brings. This is Honey in the Rock, sweet stories from hard places. Let's get started. Before we begin today's episode, I want to offer a gentle warning. This conversation may include discussions about abuse, suicide, rape, or other sensitive issues. These are hard but important topics shared with the hope of bringing healing and faith-filled encouragement. If you find these topics triggering or difficult, please listen with care. Feel free to pause, step away, or seek support if needed. If you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out to a trusted friend, a counselor, or crisis resource. Above all, know that you are not alone. There is hope, there is healing, and there is always grace for your journey. Welcome to the table, Robin.
Thank you. Grateful to be here.
I am looking forward to hearing your story. I don't know. I've heard just little tidbits, so I'm really excited to dive into your whole story of what we'll be talking about. Before we get into all of that, can you just give all the ladies who are listening a little introduction about who you are?
Yeah. So my name is Robin McDonald. I'll be married 10 years this year.
All right.
I know. I'm
Double digits.
Feel too young for that to be true. I've got 2 boys, 5 and 2. They are my little treasures. I have the blessing to get to stay at home and homeschool my oldest, and then eventually my younger one. I also do a podcast myself. I help out with leadership here at Grace. I'm an Oceanside native. I was actually born at Tri-City Hospital.
Wow.
Yep. And I lived in Oceanside the first 17 years of my life. Did a little bit of time in the San Bernardino County and LA County before returning back to Oceanside in 2020, which was when we started coming to Grace. I actually grew up in a solid home. As we get more into the story, it became less solid. But I didn't have a perfect childhood, but as far as I knew, it was amazing. And I still am very grateful for the upbringing that I had. My mom, a lot of people know her here at Grace, Anna Ryan, was always such an incredible example of someone who genuinely loves and believes in God. And I really think that I am a product of her discipleship as a mom.
Wow.
I guess that's going to make me emotional.
It's so beautiful. It's
Yeah.
such a beautiful statement, too. I don't think moms always think about that. Like, I'm discipling my kid.
She did. She
So good.
discipled me 100%. I could do a whole podcast episode talking about how much I love my mom. I'm probably like, I don't know if you can love your mom too much, but anyways, my dad, he was a good dad. I honestly, overall, when I was little, I said what most little kids do. I said he was the best daddy in the world. And so as someone could imagine, when I discovered at 19 that my dad had been unfaithful to my mom, it was pretty earth-shattering. And it was also the beginning of my parents' 11-year divorce.
Wow. Oh,
Yeah, it took a long time.
I had no idea it took that long. Oh, my goodness.
It was sticky.
Wow.
And he ended up starting a new family with a lady who was 20 years younger than him, not much older than me.
Yeah.
And unexpectedly, he ended up passing away just 4 years ago. And it's weird to share all of this because while I'd never wished that experience, nor do I believe that what happened was God's plan A, I can testify that I grew the closest to Jesus in those seasons, and I experienced his faithfulness and love like never before.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I can already tell that this is going to be heavy, and that's okay. It ought to be with the discovery of your favorite, best daddy in the world being unfaithful to your mom and then losing him 4 years ago. Why don't you just get into kind of what your life looked like at that time? Let's just dive deeper into your story. Tell us more.
Yeah, so when everything first went down, I was 19 years old. I was attending Azusa Pacific University. So I think I was in my junior year. Was it my junior, senior year? And I remember it was the end of that first semester, and it was, I think it was even like during finals week and stuff. And my sister called me.
And your older sister, right?
Younger sister.
Oh, younger sister.
Yeah, she's 3.5 years younger than me.
Okay.
And so she was still
she's still at home.
She's still at home, right.
Okay.
And she called me in hysterics. She was crying, and she I couldn't understand what she was saying for the first bit, and she basically said, Daddy is seeing another woman. He's being unfaithful to Mommy. And I was just kind of like, what? Like, how did you find out? And the way that she found out is super unfortunate. I think she was asking him to print something from his computer. She saw an image pop up or whatever. And I actually don't even know what the image is. I never saw it. But it was kind of like this awkward exchange they had where like she saw it and like just left and started crying, called me immediately.
So she found out before your mom found out?
We both knew before my mom knew. Yeah, we knew for a couple weeks before she found out. And so when she talked to me, we prayed together, and we said, okay, well, you need to like talk to Daddy about this and confront him. And we were both, I'd like to think it wasn't naivety, but we were both really hopeful that things could still work out.
Sure.
And
because there's plenty of marriages who have survived infidelity.
Yeah. And
the last thing you want is your family to implode.
Totally. And so we actually feel bad for my little self, my younger self. But so this was 2 weeks before Christmas. And so then I come back, I finish up my finals and stuff, trying to keep myself together or whatever,
right.
Just come home. And my sister and I, we're just leaning on each other this whole time. My mom doesn't know. My dad's I don't know.
Have you spoken to your dad? Did you call him? Or have you been not talking to him during this 2 weeks as well?
We were still acting like life was normal.
But you didn't confront the issue with him?
I can't remember if we both did on the phone or if just my sister did.
Okay.
But I do remember maybe just she did, because I remember I said, go talk to him and then call me right back. And I remember she said that he asked, oh, so I assume your sister knows, which I think I think he felt shame already. I'm sure he felt shame as it was, but he knew how much we loved him. He knew how much we looked up to him. And so I think he was kind of sad to find out that I already knew too. But Christmas, so it came home, had Christmas. And I remember our gift, I think it was to my dad, was we tried to put together a date night or something for them. We were trying to drum up.
You're trying to fix it,
romance.
Help. Yeah.
Yeah, we totally were. And again, my mom still didn't know. And 2 days after Christmas, I wake up and my dad was really flustered and kind of taking stuff out to the car and was and my mom looked really upset. And I was oh no. And somehow I had slept through their initial exchange with everything. It was, I don't know, it was Christmas break. I was a teenager.
Yeah.
I think I got up at 10 or 9. I don't even know. But my dad just kind of was well, you know what happened, and kind of gave me this aggressive hug or whatever. And I was just what? And then he left. And my mom gathered me and my sister. I think my sister came down even after my dad left. And my mom was I need to tell you guys something. And then we were well, we already know. And you could just see that broke her of what? And of course, it also infuriated her of that coward, for us to carry that. And it was 2 weeks, which you could say is not that much, but also too long for the daughters to,
absolutely
be carrying that. But in her fury and anger, she said, one of the first things I remember saying is, we're gonna get better from this, not bitter. And it was a journey for the three of us. We're still super tight. We are each other's support in any given thing. If anything were to happen to either of us, you can count on the other two to swoop in and throw down.
Yeah.
And that's just how it's been. So that was the start of everything. They separated, and we went from being unconcerned about finances to being consumed by whether we'd have enough to make ends meet. And I was going to a private Christian college. My parents were helping me. And I remember when I was in high school, my parents wouldn't let me work because they wanted me to focus on school and sports and stuff. My sister was working to try and make ends meet. I remember, which for anybody who knows me knows that like I'm a super health freak, but like I was living off of peanut butter sandwiches, Del Taco, and like whatever free food I can find on campus because
It's going to be the most shocking of this whole.
Robin was living off of junk food. Like what? Yeah, and literally that's all that I could afford. And I was like, I took pride in knowing when there were like freebies at restaurants, and like I knew where to, like when free pancake day at IHOP was, like I knew all the things. One of my friends was trying to get me to dumpster dive at Trader Joe's because they toss out like almost perfectly good food, but it's like expired and they can't sell it. So that's where we were financially. And I was working 3 to 4 odd jobs while going to school full time. And it was also during this time that I encountered the Holy Spirit. I had been a believer since I was a little kid. In fact, my dad was a pastor, which makes this even more sad, but he had stopped pastoring when I was around 4. So I don't usually own the title of like PK because it was such a short period of my life. But I had never seen the miraculous. And so the church that I grew up in is an Assemblies of God, but they were pretty low key. Like Assemblies is supposed to be more charismatic,
Right.
but
I grew up in an AG church as well.
Yeah,
but we were on the other end.
We were not. We were not. Like it was very low key. I couldn't even. But my parents, they actually met in a Word of Faith movement church, so also very charismatic. Like they were used to all that kind of stuff. But they had the speaker come, and I went back home to see this speaker because they said it was going to be like this really big deal. And I saw him move in the prophetic. I saw people getting healed, and I was like, "What in the world?" Like. God will just like straight up heal you. And I just was so blown away. And even like I'd never seen like a word of knowledge of like, there's someone in here, who has blah, blah. And like then I saw the person stand up and I was like, what? Like
mind blown.
Yeah, it was the coolest thing to me. And I was so grateful because I went on this journey of just getting all the more closer to the Lord and just being so stoked about who he is and what he does. And God just continued to bring me people and resources that encouraged me and built up my faith. And I was really believing, contending that my parents would get back together. I kind of consider myself like a hopeless hopeful for like all things in life.
Yeah.
And, but my heart was totally broken over my dad's choices. And at the same time, God really also, like, so I encountered Holy Spirit, but then also I encountered God the Father in a new and deeper way. And experienced his love like never before. The dreams he was giving me, the visions I was having, the words he was giving me. I just was so, so blessed. But then when I found out that my dad had married a lady that was much younger than him, I was disappointed to say the least.
Did you know did he like invite you to the wedding?
No.
Did you not?
I think you knew better.
But you didn't know he was going to even get married? Or did you
No.
find out afterwards?
No, I found out afterwards. I had heard rumors. It was such a mess. Like,
did he kind of go into no contact with you guys?
I always stayed in contact with him.
Okay.
There was like a brief moment, or I don't know, a couple months where I was like the middleman between him and my mom, which was really yucky. And not that they were like trying to put me in that position, but it was just like, that's how it was. And my heart was always, my sister and I kind of dealt with things a little bit differently. And I think her response is extremely understandable. She kind of had more of the like, you betrayed me, like, forget you.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm pretty sure she's like dealt with things within herself, but she just kind of decided like, I don't want to continue to have a relationship with you. Like, it just,
trust broken.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. My mom and I will joke, like, you don't cross Angela. Like, she's just like, she's the most loyal, compassionate, amazing friend. And then like,
she's like, fool me once, we're done.
Yeah. Yeah. So she's hardcore. And so she wasn't as interested. I think we both loved my dad very much. I think she had a different experience too because she was at home. She was suspecting that he was cheating before she found out.
Oh, really?
She heard him on phone calls.
And you had no idea?
I didn't know.
Okay.
Because I was in college.
So she's carrying this solo for a while.
Yeah.
Oh.
And she and I had gotten a lot closer as we got older. And I think in some ways it was challenging for her that I had left. And so she had a different set of challenges to face with it all.
Right.
But no, we heard rumors that he was dating some lady who was much younger from Mexico. And the weird thing is my mom's the one who's Mexican, but my dad ended up marrying a lady from Mexico and living in Mexico for most of this whole entire time that they were going through the divorce and stuff.
Wow.
And then he learned Spanish, and my dad had the most painful Spanish accent, when he would speak it. I'm just like, please make it stop. My ears are burning. So just the weirdest things, you married a Mexican, you never had interest in her culture or speaking Spanish. And then all of a sudden he did. So it was strange. A lot of it was super strange. But yeah, found out that he had married her, which was super disappointing and upsetting. And I was also 20 years younger. Are you serious? Yeah. And it just felt yuck. But then what made it really difficult was when I found out that he had a kid. And I had to navigate the feelings of why wasn't I enough?
Yeah.
We were such good, my sister and I were the typical goody-goody kids. We got the good grades, we were involved in all the things, we listened to our parents, and it was just why did you have to start this whole thing over again? Why can't you just love us? Why can't you just make this right? And so that was really difficult. And at the same time, God continued to draw me closer to him. I could just feel him moving. He affirmed his love over me. He gave me perspective and compassion for my dad. That's 100% the Lord. Because I did have to work through a lot of hurt and forgiveness. But my dad me and my dad, we got to the point where we were actually beginning to rebuild our relationship.
Yeah.
And it was still difficult and awkward. My dad, he's a funny man. He's super awkward. He's super socially awkward, which, again, if people know my mom's people are just drawn to her like a magnet. She's the most socially, emotionally intelligent.
You want to sit with Anna.
You want to be with
just,
her.
Lay your head on her shoulder.
Yes.
and you wouldn't feel weird about that.
No. And she'd be like, oh, and she would totally embrace you.
Yes.
She'd be like, come here. Yeah, my dad, he's kind of a goofy guy. And that's why I'm tall. He's super tall, goofy, the king of dad jokes, and just I don't think knew how to actually connect with people. And so he would just start telling dumb jokes and and he kind of I don't know, make a dumb face. And I'm just Dad, please stop. But I also kind of loved it. I did. I love my dad so much. And so we were working through that, and I know that I also had a major desire as a firstborn to please my parents, but I think there was a special thing of really wanting to please my dad and make him proud. And I think that motivated my desire to stay in touch because I wanted to keep showing look, Dad, I'm doing the things, I graduated college, I found my husband, and so as weird as he was and the mistakes that he made, I loved him and I wanted him to be proud of me. And so he ended up having 2 more kids. He ended up staying in Mexico. And in 2021, he got sick and he ended up in the hospital. And I actually found out because his wife called me, which I'd never spoken to her before.
Wow.
And when I would talk to my dad and he would have me FaceTime his kids and stuff, which I think he really wanted me to love them and and not that I guess I could say not that I don't love them.
Yeah.
It's just difficult.
Yeah.
And it's and they aren't and it's so weird for me to think they're my half siblings. They share blood. It's so weird. But he would always refer to his wife as the kid's mom. He would never say my wife. And I think he was trying to be as
sensitive.
Yes. And not be as inflammatory as possible because I think he also wanted to have a relationship with me and I was grateful for that.
Yeah.
But so she called me and she was like, hey, like, your dad's not well. He's in the hospital. And I was like, what? Like, and I flew out the next day to Mexico to go see him. I took Ryan with me. My mom, at the time, I had only had Reese, my oldest. She watched him for me. And when I got there, he looked like he was in a rough spot, but it was like, okay, like, you're okay. You're going to pull through. But he was in the hospital for 40 days.
40 days?
40 days.
Oh my gosh.
Which is weird because we know it's like such a biblical number, but 40 days. And his health got worse and worse. But then there'd be these like brief moments where there'd be improvement or like, oh, like this happened. And I was in conversation with the doctors. I was in conversation with his wife. I was constantly getting updates. And so that would fuel my hope. And I prayed and contended for God to heal my dad. I prayed like I never prayed. I recruited hundreds of people to join me in prayer. If you were to look at my Facebook in that year, like I was giving updates all the time. I had hundreds of people liking and commenting on my posts. Like I was like, I've got an army of people praying for him. I'm believing like my dad is going to make it. And yeah, I don't know if I was in denial or if it was actually faith, but I just was like, my dad's going to make it through. Like this is going to work. I'm going to still have my dad. And I remember after weeks of praying, he'd been in there for, several weeks, almost the full 40 days. I felt God prompt me to list out the demonic strongholds that gripped my dad. And so I remember sitting on my mom's porch. We were still living at my mom's at the time. And I just started to go to war on those strongholds over him. And I felt the Lord's presence. I felt like I was doing things in the Spirit.
Yeah.
And I actually had this vision of this like nasty, almost like an octopus squid thing that it like looked like it was like had its arms around his torso.
Yeah.
And it like lifted off of him. And I felt a shift for him in that. I felt like he had just been set free. And he ended up passing the next day. And yeah, that was rough.
Yeah.
His wife called me again and she said something very terrible has happened. And, she let me know that he had passed. And I wailed like I've never wailed before. I just hung up and it was so painful the way I felt in that moment. So sad that he was gone, but also so sad and confused as to how all of that didn't work.
Yeah.
For him to continue to live and to make it through. So and that's, I think, when I fully started to realize how much I had placed my life's achievements and things and wanting to make him proud. And I just felt this huge void. Like, my daddy's not here. Like, he's not going to know, like, what I do. Like, he's not going to meet my other kids. Like, he's not going to see it. He's not going to experience it. And I think one of the hardest things about it is it feels like a very lonely grief because his widow's kind of crazy. I think she was normal before he passed, but she kind of went crazy. Ironically, my mom's the most like empathetic, safe place I have to process my grief about him. I think just because she loves me so much. I think Ryan is very empathetic as well, but he also just doesn't understand. The interactions he had with my dad were so weird. Yeah. And my sister doesn't feel the same way. Yeah. And so I think that's one of the hardest things for me is I want to be able to feel it with my sister. And she just was kind of like, not like, oh, bummer, but like she was sad, but I don't really think she thinks about him much. And then I've like if I start to feel sad or if I start to cry, like I usually try to stuff it because I don't feel like anybody understands. And I'm grateful when I think it's the Lord who really like, we're going to like sit on this. We're going to be sad. We're going to process. But God was also really good because I didn't know where he was with the Lord when he passed. He'd always said that he had never not been a believer, but we just knew with his choices and things, like, how does that, play out or whatever. Yeah. And Ryan and I actually were listening to a book. It's by Rick Joyner, what's it called? It's the one where this guy has this vision and like there's like he's basically seeing what heaven is like and he's having different encounters with people in heaven and The Final Quest, I think is what it's called. But there's one man in the story where he basically and so the guy who's having the vision when he goes there, he has these interactions with people, and it's interesting what he's like. What, like, you're at this level of heaven? Like, I thought you'd be up here. And like they're like, oh, like no, I was like actually dealing with this, or like I had my pride got in the way or whatever. But there was one person who ended up getting sick and dying, and that person was telling the man having the vision, it was God's grace that I suffered and died because I would have never gotten my life right. And it's like, death is just one of those things that's so difficult to process. Yeah. I mean, he left behind 2 young kids. They were, I think, 6 and 3 at the time. Oh. And I just, in those 40 days, I really believe that God was working on his heart. And I really believe, and my dad was terrified. When I FaceTimed him when he was in the hospital, you could see he was in terror. He'd always been afraid of death, which is interesting when we have the hope of Jesus. Yeah. He was so scared, and I believe, and I think at this stage, he might have been scared because of the decisions that he had made. Yeah. And I just believe that God worked on his heart, and I believe when God led me to pray those things off of him, it set him free. And I believe God had him there as long as he did so he could get to the point to where he did surrender to the Lord fully and had everything dealt with. Yeah. God was so kind and gave me a few dreams actually of my dad, but there was one where my dad was like in heaven, like looking down at me, kind of like the like, hey, I'm okay thing. And when everything first went down with my parents, like God had been giving me visions about my dad, and one that I held on to and contended for was that God showed that my dad's heart had grown cold and was stony. And I remember in the picture, God, like Jesus was standing before my dad and like revealed this like fleshy, perfect, beautiful red heart, and like did that for my dad. And I just feel like, I mean, we have free will. So like, I don't know if my dad was somehow circumventing the process and this is where we ended up, but I feel like God fulfilled that vision and promise to me that my dad would get to be with him in heaven. And so like, I think for most of my life, I've been like, I want to live to be 100. Like, I don't want to die early. Like, I've got stuff to do for the kingdom here. And not that I like want to die early, because with my young kids, like I definitely want to be there for them and all that. But I'm like, heaven's going to be so cool. I'll get to be with my dad, and like, I'll get to be with my grandparents and all the people who've gone before. And like, I just think it's going to be going to a party where like all your favorite people are there.
And the best version of themselves.
Exactly. And I just feel like I'll be able to have, I don't know. So I have so much hope and gratitude for the Lord's kindness, which maybe sounds weird for having to go through all of that. Right. But God's been faithful. I feel so weird. I tell Ryan, like, can you believe like this is the life that we have? Like, I feel so blessed. Like, and if I were to just list out the things like, oh yeah, like my parents got divorced, like my dad passed away. He married it's like a novella. Like
Yeah.
it's like my dad married a woman 20 years younger and like had more kids and like, and you guys know like we went through a really hard lawsuit last year and like there's a lot of stuff that we've had to go through.
Yeah.
But I couldn't feel more blessed. Like I literally could not feel more blessed. And I feel so confident that God gets us through anything.
Yeah.
And even with like the fear of death, the sadness of death, it's just like, even then, like, it's not the end.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so a lot to unpack, and I have some questions.
I'm ready.
Thank you for sharing that. That was beautiful and sad and heartbreaking and all of it.
Yeah.
So first, thank you for sharing all of that. I want to back up to the affair.
Sure.
Because I know as I'm listening to your story, and I want to kind of go back and kind of hit different aspects of this, I'm thinking of all the gals that are listening to this who are also, I think a few different ones, products of divorce.
Right.
Kids who've been impacted by divorce. And, you know, we always kind of focus on the divorcees that
Sure.
are getting and going through it. And often the kids, even the adult kids, are the collateral damage in all of that. So one question I have, which has to do with the affair and you finding out before your mom. And I don't know if there's even a right or wrong answer to this, because I've known other young adults and teenagers who have discovered that their parent is having an affair, and the parent knows that they know, and they don't tell the other spouse or the other parent. If you had to do it over, would you do it the same way, or would you do you think it was still the right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying this with any bias.
Sure,
I really don't know. Like, do you feel like, did you feel like it was the right decision to like not maybe even confront your dad and say, you have until this to tell mom, or I'm telling her, or did your mom hold any like resentment, or did she have to struggle because you guys knew and didn't tell her?
Yeah. That's a good question. So I don't think I would do it differently. My sister and I definitely put it in his court of like, you need to tell her. The unfortunate thing is that my mom didn't even hear it from him. She found out from one of the women that he was doing it with or whatever. And my mom found out through Facebook Messenger, which that was a long time ago. So it was like such a weird avenue. But I guess, So she saw the message, and so then she confronted my dad and was like, who is so-and-so? And why am I receiving this message saying that you guys have a relationship? And that's how she found out. So my sister and I were really, like, we told him, we said, you need to tell her. And like, we're praying, and we told him, we're praying for you. We're praying for her. We're praying that this is still going to work out. Yeah. Because it only been 2 weeks, I don't know how long we would have let it go before we said something. I'm trying to remember if we did say something to the effect of like, if you don't tell her, we will. My mom I could totally see how a mom would feel betrayed or be sad or upset with their kids. And I think that's understandable. Just who my mom is. She's such a mature person.
Yeah, she is.
She was heartbroken that we had to carry that. Yeah. It wasn't even about her. Like, she was just so sad that we had to find out, and that we had to carry that, and that my dad wasn't brave enough to just tell her. Yeah. The thing that she did get upset with me about that I'm sure she'll mention, but was, it's not that I didn't empathize with her, but I kept encouraging her to forgive him. And she just was like, and I think her intention and desire was always to forgive him.
Right.
But I think maybe she felt like I was encouraging it too soon, or like, and maybe I was. I know my mom, and I saw the anger and the rage and just where she was at, that I just was like, I want my mama to be free. And I know that freedom's on the other side of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And so sometimes she would have a hard time with me, which is totally understandable, because I'd just be like, Mom, like, you have to forgive him. Like, you have to forgive him. Like, it doesn't make what he did right. It doesn't minimize it. Like, I'm not okay with what he did. So that was kind of hard, especially since her and I are so close. And so I think sometimes she didn't feel like I was on her side, even though if I was to pick a side, I totally would be on her side. But I just kind of held that like neutral space. Whereas my sister was like, forget him. Like, yeah, mama, like, grr, like,
yeah.
And so she had her as like her hype person or whatever to lean on. So I think that was probably our biggest challenge at the beginning, was where we kind of were all at with that. Which again, like, my sister had to carry a different burden. My mom had to carry a different burden. They were married for 27 years at that point, I think. So, I mean, again, totally understandable to be angry.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was probably the way that played out.
That's helpful. On the point of you're a daddy's girl, you're like loving on him. You're so like proud of him, even with his social awkwardness, all the things.
Yeah.
You know, who doesn't roll their eyes at their parents
Yeah.
at some point? Then you find this out, and your relationship is strained for a little bit.
Yeah.
It sounds to me like you had to grieve like who he was,
100%.
and then have to grieve him again
Yes.
at a totally different level
Yes.
when he passed. But like, can you just speak to the grief and the kind of the letting go of the dad that he was,
Yeah.
and then the dad that he became to you? And just like, I'm wanting to
Yeah.
help those that are also maybe having these conflicts and this tug of war of trying to reconcile, like, this was my hero,
Right.
and then now it's tainted. And how did you, obviously your sister has a different story, but how
Sure.
did you reconcile
Yeah.
those vast differences in your dad and have this place where you could still honor him,
Yeah.
even though you did not respect the choice and the choices that he was making and continued to make?
Yeah. I think I had to step into what every adult has to do with their parents earlier than most people need
Yeah.
to, where you kind of recognize like your parents are human too. And so I did have to mourn the loss of my dad. And I remember talking about that. I did end up going to a counselor when things first went down, which was super helpful. And it was a lot of unpacking the different layers of grief about it.
Yeah.
And okay, so my dad's not necessarily who I thought he was. And now like my relationship with him's forever changed. And it took, because it was in 2011 when I found out that he was unfaithful. And it wasn't until probably 2018, 19 when I started to feel like we really got some better traction. And there was a time where I hadn't talked to him as much. I remember my grandma told me that he told her like, oh, my kids abandoned me. They don't love me anymore, which that was my dad had a lot of good qualities. He really did. One thing I think that really undermined him was that he kind of had a victim mentality.
Yeah, it sounds like it with that statement.
Yes. Yeah. And I think looking at his life, I had compassion for where he ended up. And I honestly like look at where he ended up and think, wow, like God really did a work to bring him out of that. My dad was an only child. His dad abused him. His grandfather molested him. He was a latchkey kid. My grandmother was doing the best she could as a single mom to provide for him when he was ages first, second grade, letting himself in home, cooking himself his own meals. She remarried when he was 10 or 11, and her husband had 3 other kids. So he went from being an only child to having 3 step siblings.
Wow.
And then they decided to be foster parents. They lived in a house where I think he said they had like 10 to 15 kids in the house at one point.
Oh my gosh.
And
So
so,
going from a
yes,
so
abused only child to one of the many.
yeah.
And then he left as soon as he could when he was like 18, joined the army, quickly decided he didn't want to do that, left the army. So I just, I look at his life and I'm like, well, gosh dang, like by the Lord's grace, you married an incredible woman.
Yeah.
I mean, my mom's amazing.
Yeah.
He had me and my sister. Like, I think we're pretty cool.
I can attest.
He ended up being very successful in the business world. We ended up being pretty well off as a family. Like, he loved to help people. He's actually a very generous man. He loved to be able to give financially. He did a lot of great things. And his Achilles heel was, I don't think he ever fully broke out of the truly victim experiences he had,
Right.
but kind of, received that full healing. And so, and my sister hates the victim mentality, which understand, like, who does, like,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So I think for her, it's like, and that was the thing too, when I would talk to him, I couldn't express to him that I was sad or upset. So that was another thing of like, you expect your parent to comfort you
Yeah.
and to like empathize. Like, I can tell my mom anything. Like, she's right there with me with whatever I need. Like, my dad, like, if I started to cry or say how I was like still hurting or sad about what happened, he'd be like, if you don't deal with that, like, you're going to ruin your marriage. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah, like he'd be very like, but it's because he felt so much shame. So I even had like,
Yeah.
I feel like the Lord continued to give me perspective because I was like, okay, well, it's not that he doesn't love me. It's not that he doesn't want to love me in that moment.
Yeah.
He literally doesn't have the capacity. He is so shamed. When I bring up my hurt about what he did, he wants to push it away because he's feeling so much shame.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for the Lord to give me that so that one, like, just wasn't always crushed, but then
Yeah.
2, I could move forward in my relationship with him. And so it definitely went from a daddy's my hero. I can go to my dad for, he always he wanted to be that like daddy advice. Like, he would just say like, try to give suggestions to things and like always try to like have something valuable to say to me or give to me, which like sometimes I was like, okay, cool. Like, and it just was kind of like, well, like, you really don't have that place anymore.
Yeah.
But he still was my dad. It wasn't that he wasn't my dad, but I also, I guess, just saw him for the broken man that he was.
I think there's so much to be said for that because I think I see a lot of folks that get stuck here
Yeah.
and they want to forgive, but they were victimized.
Right.
You were victimized.
Sure.
You were betrayed. You were let down. You were broken. You were hurt. And it is so easy for people to sit in that seat of judgment
Right.
because it's so obvious who did the hurting. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, there's no doubt. Like, you were an innocent bystander in all of this.
Yeah.
And so how easy it is and would be for you to just be like, screw you.
Yeah.
You did this. Like, you're the problem. I didn't ask for this.
Yeah.
You did this. Why am I having to extend the olive branch? Why? All the
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And make sure that your emotional like levels aren't being bumped by my emotions.
Right.
So it'd be so easy, and it is so easy for so many to just remain there. Like, I'm going to forgive them, but
Yeah.
and maybe and some people won't even go to the forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I think there's something so significant when we pause and we ask God to give him his perspective on that individual.
Right.
As evil, as broken that they may be.
Mm-hmm.
And this is so unrelatable to the story that you're telling, but I just saw something on Facebook or Instagram, I don't know which one, and it was this like waitress who got a $5 tip, and she was angry. She was like calling, and she's like, listen, this is what we live off of, blah, 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 blah. And like, if you can't afford to pay at least 18%, then go to fast food and da-da. And in my heart, I'm thinking, girl, like, okay, first of all, step off your high horse. Like, you are not entitled. But I was like, but I automatically start thinking of, what if this was like a mom who had saved up.
Like their one chance to go out
to go
and
out
eat. Yeah.
to a nice dinner, and all she had was $5 left over to tip.
Yeah.
It's like I all of a sudden think of like, we don't know other people's stories and why they acted out the way they did, why they went the direction they did, and in no way justifying the crime, the sin, all of that. It doesn't justify it, but what it does is, and I can tell it did it for you, is it gives you grace. If there's like a grace that's extended to be able to still hold them, maybe not with respect, but with honor.
Yeah.
And to be able to honor the intrinsic value that they still bring, that God has still placed on them.
Yeah.
And even the grace to be able to help you process so that you can forgive and release them, because they too are a broken person. And are they responsible for their healing journey? 100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that generation didn't go get therapy.
No.
They didn't go. It was like shameful.
Right.
And that still doesn't excuse it, but
Totally.
it's a part of the story that we have to tell ourselves in order to have compassion and understanding and grace. And so I think for those that are listening, it would be good for you to just pause and ask the Holy Spirit to like, what's your heart for my dad or my mom or the person who betrayed me? Because I think there's so much healing that can come when God gives you a bigger picture outside of your pain that you're walking through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. I honestly think that's how I made it through. And yeah, it did dramatically impact my life. It showed up in my marriage. I mean, I found out about my dad's affair a year before I met Ryan. So bless Ryan. I was like, men are murder and like they can't be trusted.
Yeah, of course.
And here's sweet, precious Ryan.
He is sweet.
He is. He's super sweet. He looks angry, but he's sweet. That's our inside joke about him. But yeah, he really is. And for me to even like worry or question him is such an unfortunate thing that I was in that place when he's such a sweet, loyal man. And it affected our intimacy. It affected so many things for years, and there's still traces of it,
of course,
that we have to work through. And that stings for Ryan. Like, that's unfair to him. And, you know, there's such a huge ripple effect.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I don't know. I see my dad's humanity. Like I said, I have compassion. I can see how he ended up where he did. I agree it was on him to work it out. I think it also, like, the things I do at Grace, in some ways it fuels what I care about. Like, I'm like, we got it, like, discipleship. Like, it's so important, like, that we're building up people that they learn how, like, when you mentioned the thing about the waitress, I was like, that's feedback for her. Maybe she didn't do a good job. Like, she needs to consider, like, maybe she did, like, I don't know, she wasn't personable enough, or I don't know. Like, but it's like, how do we get into a place where we shift out of being the victim? How do we get into the place where we are stronger in our faith? And so I just think, you know, okay, that was his story and that's where he was at. You can have someone who has the same story, who takes hold of God's grace and transformation and completely breaks free from the victim mentality. And so I think it's a super good lesson for me. I think as Ryan and I, like I said, we're going to be celebrating 10 years this year. This is going to sound so bad. I'm being so honest right now. I can see how people end up in affairs.
Absolutely.
Like, I get it. Like, and again, I love Ryan. He's a beautiful man. He's a beautiful man.
Yeah.
And we're fully committed to each other. And I also, like, you can find other people attractive if you and I love what you guys are doing with XO and how like you guys emphasize like the boundaries and all that looks like. And so I have even understanding from my dad, and I really feel like the Lord has given me and Ryan insight of like, we're breaking generational stuff. Cause like I said, his dad was unfaithful. His dad did the same thing to his mom, and who knows what happened, before that or whatever. And so I'm like, you know what? Like, that's in my family line. So I get to be vigilant. I'm not just going to assume because I grew up as the goody and all the things that like I'm beyond making mistakes like that.
Right.
And I'm human. And so
we are all one stupid decision away from blowing up our lives.
Totally.
Like all of us.
Yeah. And I think that's such a humbling, important thing to remember. And it keeps us off the high horse of like, well, how could he do that?
Exactly.
And, all the things. And it's just like, well, okay. Again, it doesn't justify anything. It doesn't. It emphasizes the need for Jesus.
Yeah.
It emphasizes the need for us to check our hearts.
Yeah.
One of my prayers to God constantly is like, Lord, like, show me the ish. Let's get it out. I want it dealt with. I don't want it in there. I don't want it festering. I don't want it to take root. And there's so much inside of us that like we're completely unaware of that the Lord needs to bring to the surface and deal with. And I'm like, man, like if anything, he was a victim of the enemy's ploy to keep him as a victim, to keep those things rooted. And that's not going to be my life. That's not going to be my boys' life. I pray over them every day that that's not going to be a generational thing. Like, and so as sucky as all of that was, as much as it stinks, as sad as I am that my dad's not here, I'm also grateful for the way that God does turn everything around for good. Yeah. And I'm grateful for his grace to work in and through Ryan and I and our relationship and our children, and humbly coming before him. Like, Lord, give me patience, so.
Well, I'm also just on the subject of forgiveness too. Yeah. I love to emphasize, like, because I think forgiveness gets a bad rap and it's easily misunderstood.
Feels weak.
Yes. And it feels like you are like sweeping it under the, like, it's all good. No, it doesn't have to be all good. Yeah. Like I tell people all the time, you could be forgiving and calling the cops to come and arrest your abusive husband at the same time. Like, you can testify in a court case to send them to prison and still forgive. Right. And so I'm like reading this book right now. It's by Lisa Turkhurst.
Oh, fun. She's great.
Forgive what you can't forget. Something like that. I don't even know if that's the right term. But I really appreciate what she was saying, because she's like, there was this initial, like, you forgive the act, like the facts of it. Sure. Your dad had an affair. Yeah. He broke your heart, your mom's heart, your sister's heart. Like, there was betrayal. You forgive that. And she goes, it's kind of like someone who is like a pedestrian that gets hit by a car, and, and they walk with a limp for the rest of their life. Yeah. And they forgive, like, the act of it, the initial act. There's been healing, but every day there's reminders of the impact of that. Right. Every time you look at those tennis shoes that you can no longer run, it's a reminder, oh my gosh, I got hit by a car. Right. Every time that you look in the mirror and see a video of yourself walking and you see the limp, it's a reminder of the impact. I got hit by a car. And so as you have been walking out life, and you've had these moments too of when you met Ryan, impact. Right. In some ways, you don't even know when the impact of that act is going to show up. Right. Because you don't know until you're in those situations. Like when you have a child, I'm like, there were so many other layers of impact in areas of my life that I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought I forgave. Well, I did. I forgave the act. Right. But then the impact of that, like you said, has a ripple effect. Yeah. And some things you may not even know that it's going to impact you until that situation or that memory or that trigger arises. And then you get to make another decision. Lord, I forgive my dad for, and then you get really specific.
Yeah.
Like in regards to the thing that just caused it to come out. What made you have a
For leaving
visceral
my-
reaction?
Yeah. For leaving my mom all alone. Like,
Yeah. So again, I'm talking with Robin, not Ryan, but Robin. And I'm also like, we're also talking to you who are listening. Like, forgiveness is not a one-time event. And I've said that
No.
in other episodes, and I'm going to
Yeah.
continue to say it because it needs to be said. It's like an onion. There's layers. You forgive. The first act, forgiveness is really letting yourself get out under the control
Right.
of that person
Right.
and their decisions and how and what they did to you. And it's putting them in the hands of God, the greatest judge,
Right.
the greatest father who sees from beginning to end. And he knows all the chess pieces that are in play.
Yeah.
And when you trust Father God,
Yeah.
it's far easier to forgive because you
Yeah.
know Dad's going to handle it.
Right.
He's going to handle it, and I don't have to worry about it anymore. And so it's an initial act, and then it's a continual forgiveness when
Yeah.
you feel the impact, the pain, the anger that may still arise at different times.
Yeah. And that, I mean, yeah, the impact, like I said, it's still today, and you do get to keep making that decision. I think, I don't know, I'm a stronger personality. I don't like to feel weak, even though, there's so much wisdom in the Lord of just like being one
In
who's
our
surrendered.
weakness, he is strong.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. But for those that maybe are similar to me, it's the strongest posture you can take
Yeah.
to forgive. Like, and even if you're still like navigating anger towards the person, it's like, you know what? Like, oh, I'm going to forgive you because you know what? Like, that's unleashing God
Yeah.
on that person.
Yeah.
And that, for me too, the other thing is it's twofold. There's absolutely the accountability of the individual, but it's also the enemy.
Yeah.
And I get into war mode about the enemy, and I'm like, freak the devil. Like, and I'm just like, that's motivating to me to forgive. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's just like, you know what? Like, you're not going to get to have root in my heart in life.
Absolutely.
And keep me in unforgiveness and have an open door to wreak havoc in my life because I haven't forgiven. You're not going to get to continue to have access to that person that I'm not forgiving. Like,
Yeah.
I am blessing them. I might not feel like it, but I
Right.
will bless them because hell does not get to have way in my vicinity.
Right.
Like, if I have influence in any way, shape, or form, like, hell's not getting access.
Yeah.
And that, I don't know, feels more powerful.
It does. I mean, you kind of think about it like, okay, a bomb just went off and now it's the cleanup time.
Yeah.
And God is in there ready to restore and mend what can be mended and fix what can be fixed and make something beautiful out of this destruction. But when we stay and choose unforgiveness, we are continually resetting the bomb off over
100%.
and over and over again.
Yeah.
And the other person has moved on. Like,
Right.
this is
It's not
just
blowing
in
them up.
us. Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
they're in Hawaii sipping Mai Tais and like living the
Yeah.
Vida Loca. I don't even know. I shouldn't even try to speak Spanish. There's a song. I don't even remember what it was. But like, they're just living the life, and you're the one experiencing bomb after bomb after
Right.
bomb, because unforgiveness does open us up to the demonic. And
Yes.
it's not popular to say. I
Right.
know that. Like,
Right.
it's the last thing we want to hear, but it is an access point
But it's true.
for the
Yeah.
spiritual warfare and for the enemy to be able to waltz in and out
Don't give
without
him
being
space.
checked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't let him keep this bomb going off like a Groundhog's Day in your
Right.
life. Like, God is like, no,
Right.
it is time to move forward and to rebuild.
Yeah.
And God will deal. God will deal with not just the person who has hurt you. God will also deal with the enemy
Yeah.
who is out to steal, out to kill, and out to destroy.
Yeah.
And he can't do that. He can't fight for us the way that he needs to and wants to and longs to when we are harboring
Right.
unforgiveness.
Right. We're giving keys to the enemy. And
Mm-hmm.
God's like, can we not?
Can we not?
Let's close that door and keep it shut.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that's the relationship that we have with the Lord, right? That's the the freedom that we have in our choices and the impact of our choices.
Yeah.
And so we can choose to align ourselves with God's kingdom and what he put in place. Like, and even too, I mean, it's not meant to bring shame on anybody who's struggling with unforgiveness, but we do have the reality that we have been forgiven. Like,
Right.
we have been forgiven. We are all sinners. Like, and I used to really hate that phrase. Like, I would, because as a little goody goody, I was like, you know what? Like, I've been a pretty good kid.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like talking about like, woe is you, like, you know, or whatever. And I don't know, maybe just motherhood, marriage, like there's a lot of dirty, yucky stuff in there. Like, it's like, I need you, Jesus. But
Yes.
I think when we can remember that, it's like none of us are without need to be forgiven. And who are we to not forgive someone else?
Right.
And I understand it's hard. Like I do. I
Yes.
get it. But I've also tasted the freedom of it.
Yeah.
And because I have experienced what it's like to make that choice, and like you said, not just once, but over and over and over again, I become aware of how that's just like removing chain after chain after chain that the enemy's trying to throw on me and keep on me.
Right. Yeah.
And I can't emphasize enough the power of forgiveness.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, let's shift gears and touch on the loss of your dad
Sure.
again.
Okay.
Finalized. I mean, there's the aspect of like, now your dad is passed,
Mm-hmm.
and we can talk as much about that as we need to. But I think what I want to touch on the most and ask you questions about is the wrestling that must have happened between in your faith
Yeah.
when you were praying and believing and doing all the things, and it still ended in death.
Yeah.
Can you just, because there's a lot of people,
Yeah.
again, that
Yeah.
they hope, they believe, and
Right.
it doesn't end up the way that we hoped and expected.
Right.
And it feels like a gut punch
Yeah.
to our faith.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about that?
Yeah. It was a gut punch. I was like, what the heck, God?
Yeah.
And it rattled my faith in God. It really did. And my trust in him. Because it was like, and I think that's part of what we have to wrestle with is, okay, God, you're good. You're always good. You're faithful. And I mean, that's the problem of evil. And yet horrible things happen.
Yeah.
And I remember experiencing a lot of, I was hesitant to pray for things. I'm like full faith, like, let's pray for that, let's believe for that, like it's gonna turn around. Like it's like I said, I'm a hopeless hopeful. And it felt really strange because I didn't feel like myself. I wasn't operating out of the identity in Christ that the way God made me, because I was like, well, wait a second, like that seemed like a really good outcome. That seemed like something God should have answered. That
Yeah.
seemed like something that you'd want to do, God. Like, and look at all the passages, like when two or more are gathered, when you have faith, like a mustard seed. I was like, God, that had to have been at least like a sunflower seed of faith. Like I was going for it, you know? And I had so many other people praying too. And so it was like the formula didn't work. That like X plus C equals healing equals miracle. Like it's supposed to every single time. And so, yeah, I totally wrestled with God's goodness. And yet being a longtime Christian, I also was like, you know, just told myself like, okay, like your ways are higher than my ways. Okay. Like I know you're still good, but also like, please don't do any more things like this. Like, I don't like this. This really hurts and sucks.
Yeah.
And I know I've shared with you at another point, I had gotten pregnant with my second shortly after my dad's memorial. It was a few months after he passed. And pregnancy in general is just unsettling. We do want to try for a third, and I do feel a lot more confident for the third, which I'll get to in a moment why I feel more confident. But I was nervous about it. It's always like, oh gosh, I hope this is going to work out. I hope everything's going to be okay. Like, and you hear all the stories about all the things that happen in pregnancy. And then I think it was around 18 or 20 weeks, I went in for an ultrasound and they were like, oh, it looks like we didn't know it was a boy at the time. Your umbilical only has one artery instead of two. And I was like, that doesn't sound good.
And can you keep talking?
And so they're like, we'll double check or whatever. So they checked, was verified and confirmed. You're supposed to have two arteries and one vein. I only had one artery and one vein in my umbilical cord for my baby. And so I was like, okay, well, how can that affect the baby? Like, tell me the things. And they said, well, it can affect their growth, their development, which then, can lead to whatever kinds of issues that the baby could have. And so from then on, so there's the next, 20 whatever weeks of the pregnancy, every single day. And this was a hard choice to make because I felt like I gave my all in prayer to pray for my dad and believe for his healing. Yeah. But I was like, okay, God, like this is your chance to prove to me that you're still good. And I remember praying things like, please show me that you're still good. And I wrestled with the like, if my baby has defects, like we're still gonna love him. Like I had to go through all those like hard thoughts.
Yeah.
And they asked me like, do you want to get testing done? I was like, no, I don't want testing. Like, it can also be helpful to get testing to know what you're dealing with down the road or whatever. But I was like, no, like whatever it is, like we're going to love it. We're going to move forward with it or whatever. But I just was like, God, like I want a healthy baby. I want a healthy pregnancy. I want a healthy delivery. And I said, okay, God, in Jesus' name, like I speak for every single cell, every single ligament, every single organ, every single aspect of this baby's body would be healthy and well in the name of Jesus. And I prayed that every single day, twice a day or more, and just of the pregnancy. And baby was born. And so I said that it could affect your growth, the baby's growth. Mr. Riley was 9 pounds, 2 or 4 ounces.
That's not a small baby
No.
for those of you who have not had babies.
I was like, that's why that hurt so bad. And the placenta, which is connected to the umbilical cord, the nutrients that go to developing the placenta obviously is affected. All the nutrients the baby needs to grow, the placenta needs to grow, come from the umbilical cord. And with less blood flow from only having one artery, all that can be impacted. I'm a weirdo. I got my placenta encapsulated and I do that with my babies. But the gal who encapsulated it was like, she's done hundreds of placentas. She's like, I've never seen one this big. She was like, you have over, I think she's like 120 capsules. She's like, the average is like 90. And I was like, oh. And then when they cut the umbilical cord, they showed it to me. The one artery that we had was massive. Wow. It was the size of 2.
Wow.
And so I just was like, okay, God, like, thank you. And I was beside myself, like in tears of gratitude of just like, I have my precious baby. And like, not only was he healthy, but it felt like God was like, giant baby, giant placenta. Look at it. Like, look at how I made that work in the umbilical cord. And so, between that and we went through a really challenging time with the lawsuit, like I just feel like God has been like, and I still don't understand why my dad couldn't have just lived. I don't. Right. I wish he was alive. I really do. I don't necessarily in my own human belief think that the best thing was that he died and left his kids behind and all of that, right. But also I feel like God has been like, I am good. I am faithful. Like you can still count on me. You can still pray and believe for the miraculous. Yeah. You can still hope for the best. And I've seen his goodness and his hand in hard things that have happened since his passing and just these last few years. And I'm like, okay, God, like no matter what, you get me through. No matter what, I can trust you. And I do. I feel so much more confident for when we have baby number 3. Like I'm like, you know what? Like you're good. You're good. I can trust you.
Wow. Yeah. I like that you are still not wrestling with your faith, but that you still have the questions.
Yeah.
Because I think that it's good for people to hear, like, it's okay to still be like, I don't know why it didn't end the way that I thought it should.
Right.
And how it could have ended. Because obviously we know God is absolutely able to heal.
Totally.
He's absolutely able. So why? We don't know. And sometimes I've just had to to give this resolve in me when it comes to the prayers that don't get answered in the
Right.
time or the way that I really contended for.
Yeah.
And I just have to be like, okay, here's what I know.
Mhm.
Here's what I know to be true.
Right.
You're good. You're a good father.
Mhm.
And I see in part and I know in part.
Right.
And I don't see the whole picture. And so knowing that you're good, because I put myself in my kids' shoes, like
Yeah.
when they're like 4 and 5 and even 13
Yeah.
and 18, it's like they're still like, there are decisions that we need to make in their life that sometimes feels really unfair and really wrong to them
Sure.
because they don't know what we know.
Right.
They don't see what we see, and they don't even have the capacity at 4 and 5 to understand some of the ramifications of if we would have
Right.
said yes to that. And so I, as a mediocre parent,
Same.
like can do that and realize, like, for my kids, if I can get and understand this as a parent, then as God's child, I can, this is probably the wrong wording, but I can let them off the hook for my, like, you should haves, because I've had to do that with my kids.
Right.
And at the risk of being misunderstood by my kids,
Yeah.
had to make the hard decisions
Yeah.
at the expense of sometimes being hated
Right.
by my kids.
Yeah.
I've made decisions that are good for them, even though it doesn't feel good for them.
Right.
And so I've had to just like make those shifts when I wrestle and have those questions of like, why?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you're a good father. You give
Right.
good gifts to your kids. You only have the best for me. And I've always been safe in your arms,
Right.
even in unsafe situations.
Yeah.
And so I'm continuing to trust you. And sometimes I just have to say that out loud, like, okay, I don't want to trust you, but I'm trusting you. I'm
Yeah.
trusting you. Like, in this moment, it's painful, but I know that you have, as your word has said multiple times, like we've said this, like you are able to take something that was meant to destroy us and turn it into something beautiful. And so, like, Lord, I'm trusting that at some point, I may not see it now because I'm in the mess, I'm in the dark, I'm in the storm, like I'm in the pit. I may not see it now, but give me a few years. In a few years, I may be able to see what I haven't been able to see in this exact moment. So I'm not going to abandon my faith in you and in your goodness. But it is hard. It's just,
Yeah.
it's not easy in those moments where your faith is like, wait, what? So that's kind of helps me, that perspective as a mom, to kind of put myself in God's shoes as much
Right.
as I can, because I'm so far less than who God is, and I see so far less. So that's kind of how I process disappointment.
Yeah. And I think, we will find out all when we go to heaven.
We will.
I think also everything is so much more palatable in a bigger context as well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't, sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not, to like, I don't know, try and figure things out. I'm kind of, I don't know, maybe I'll still try and figure out what the deal is with my dad's passing. But what I have seen, kind of to the point of like, okay, my dad passed, that was super hard, I prayed and contended, but then I had this situation with my baby, then I had this situation with this lawsuit. They're like, in Jesus' name, we don't have anything in the near future. But it's just like, I'm only in my 30s, and I feel like the life that I've lived, I can see there are just seasons of life. Like there are hard
Yep.
seasons, there are super easy seasons, and I remember too, even just this past year, we were going through a lot of hard stuff, and like I remember asking God, like, will we ever get to just like live life? Like I'm gonna have a nice day today, or am I gonna always like be worried about
Yeah.
like this and this, or like is this gonna resolve or whatever? And sure enough, like the last couple months have felt that way where I'm like, oh, this is nice. But it's like this like PTSD where I'm like, is this okay? Like to just like feel like things are okay right now. But then I'm like, you know what? Like, let me embrace this. Like life has hard things.
Enjoy the calm seas.
Right? Yeah. Like don't make it messy if it doesn't need to be. But I think that's life.
Yeah, it is life.
And it's not always the most comforting thing, but Jesus did say, in this life, you will have trials and tribulation.
Yeah.
And so
yep.
It doesn't make things easier. It's not necessarily the most comforting thing. But what is comforting is that God is with me. He is with me through it.
Yeah.
And he works it out. I might not understand it. I don't always like the result.
Right.
But I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I feel him, and I have never felt without him in anything that I faced.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
We've definitely gotten off script, which is fine, because this has been a fabulous conversation. I don't want it to be the never-ending podcast episode. Is there more that you, in kind of you writing down your thoughts, that you feel like, I really want these gals to hear this? And if there's not, that's also okay, and we can kind of like begin to wrap it up, but I want to make sure that I'm not skipping over important parts of your story.
No, I think we definitely covered all of it. A lot of the other stuff I was going to say just honestly was emphasizing more of how hard everything was. But I also have some encouragement I would love to share, but
yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah, but okay. I think I definitely have a tendency to like package things on a more positive note, and I definitely don't want anyone to feel like, oh, Robin was like, oh, I forgive you, Dad, like it's good or whatever, even though you like stabbed my back, because that wasn't the case, and it was difficult. I remember even when and this was actually something the first time I ever had this brought to my attention, when I first met with a counselor, just shortly after everything happened, I told him the whole story, and he was like, do you realize you just shared everything with a smile on your face about the tragedy of your parents' divorce and all this stuff? And I was like, no, I did not realize that.
Wow.
And so I realized that I have this tendency to do that and to kind of skirt over the hard things. And so, like I said, it did impact my relationship with Ryan. And as if the cheating wasn't enough, like I said, when he was with, like, oh, you're with someone 20 years younger. What the heck? Okay, now you're married. Okay, now you have a kid. Oh, great. Now you have another kid. And I do also remember kind of that like ripple effect you were saying of forgiveness, being so frustrated. And this also could be like part of my desire to like make my dad proud. It's like I was so excited for him to meet my first son. And then he was trying to make me proud of his kids. Like he's like, look, my kid. I'm like, the heck? Like you're not supposed to be having kids. You're supposed to be the grandparent that is stoked about my kids.
Yeah.
And I had to work through that. And that made me, that was really upsetting to me. And I had to process that. And I also, even to this day, like my mom is super grandma. Like the boys call her Lita. And I have my two boys. My sister has her son. We all live in the North County area. And there's Ryan's parents are in Michigan. There's challenges with my sister's in-laws. Like she's like the grandparent that watches them. And I'm like, man, like, and she says like, man, sometimes it's so hard to do by myself. And in an ideal world, like they would have grown old together. And my boys would get to get all the stupid dad jokes that my dad tells and stuff. And, so there's a lot of things that I've had to mourn. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things I've been upset about. And yeah, I mean, I share what I have about forgiveness, about being able to get to a place with my dad, about even being so sad that he's not here in light of what he did, because God is faithful, and I would not be in a place to forgive him. I would not be in a place to have the perspective that I do had I not brought this to the Lord. And I did a lot of journaling, when everything first went out, and I would let God know all my thoughts and feelings about things.
Good.
And he was so kind and so sweet and so gracious, and he would meet me in all the feelings. And every time, like, he knew how much truth I needed for whichever like emotion I was navigating. It would just be this like, consider this, here's this. And sometimes it was just like, I love you, daughter. I'm your heavenly Father. And when we bring it all to him, he's good. He walks us every step of the way. And what I'm sharing too, again, it was 2011. We're almost 15 years since everything first went down. If you were to talk to me 10 years ago, even when Ryan and I were first married, it'd be a different conversation.
Yeah.
You know?
Because it's a process and it's a journey. Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up, what encouragement do you want to leave with these ladies who are listening?
Yeah. So like I said, I like to be in warrior mode. Actually, let me say that. I'd rather be in warrior mode than in victim mode.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily like to have to battle, but we are in a spiritual battle. And the enemy's, like you said, you quoted John 10:10, the enemy is out to steal, kill, and destroy. And so my biggest encouragement to everyone is to suit up and put on the armor of God.
Good.
Because the devil loves this kind of chaos. He loves divorce. He loves death. He loves anger. He loves all the things that come into play here. And he wants to use all of it for ammo to wreck your life. He wants to create neural pathways in your brain that can't let go of the hurt and pain of what someone's done to you.
Yeah.
And the Lord wants to use the same things.
Yeah.
But he wants to use them to bring healing, freedom, strength, peace, hope, all of these things that we have in the Lord. And the lies, the fears, the twisted perspectives that the enemy throws are sinister. And they're not just meant to be against you, they're meant to be against your family. The devil's out for taking out generations.
Absolutely.
And if a thought that you have about yourself, about someone else, if there's tension or division present with you and a family member, if you don't feel like you even have hope or faith for a better tomorrow, or that a situation that you're in can actually be remedied, I encourage you to bring that to God and get the devil's hand out of your struggle. And I guess I would say to make the decision. I've seen in this journey with myself, my mom, my sister, there's times where it feels like I'm not ready to forgive yet. And I get that. I do. I guess my encouragement would be to like make the decision that you will, and to what you were saying about the Lisa Turker's book of forgive what you can today and plan to forgive more tomorrow. Like, don't just shelve it. Don't wait until you feel like it, because you might not. You really might not. And that time and space that you give to it to fester is the enemy's territory.
Yeah.
And so that would be my encouragement. The words that my mom said, we're gonna get better, not bitter. And so make that choice now, because God is faithful and he's with you.
Well, a great resource is Lisa Turker's book, Forgiving What You Can't Forgive. No, wait, forgiving what you can't forget. That's the right one. Great resource if you have been in a situation where someone has deeply wounded and betrayed you, and we're not asked to forget. So it's okay. Like, isn't that good news? Like, we're not asked to forget, but we are asked to forgive. So read that book or audiobook it like I do with every book in my world. The only
way we can do it, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. This was beautiful. It was a beautiful hard. And as our podcast is called, like Honey in the Rock, finding sweetness in the hard places. I can see it. I've knowing you, I get to partake in the sweet side of what you have gone through and contended for. And I can testify that you are not bitter.
Amen.
Like, you are better for it. And you've really allowed God to do some deep work in you so that you're on the other side of the pain, the heartbreak, the sting, the grief, the loss. Of course, there'll always be lingering things of those as they come up, but you've really just displayed grace, beauty, and I love how you champion others to do the same. Like, you are a hero, and your dad would be so proud.
Thank you.
Be so proud. Whew. Will you pray for the ladies?
Yeah.
As we end this podcast.
Yeah, I'd love to. God, I thank you so much that you are with us in the hardest things that we face, Lord. I thank you that when we are feeling betrayed, when we are feeling hurt, when we are feeling broken, Lord, when we're angry, that you don't turn away from us, but that you embrace us. I pray, God, that every single listener would feel your embrace. I pray, Holy Spirit, that you would give them the comfort that they need, that you'd give them the conviction they need, that you would give them the direction that they need, God, to navigate whatever they're facing right now. Lord, I do speak against every single lie and attack of the enemy over those listening that would try to steal and kill and destroy their lives and their families. I rebuke it all in the name of Jesus. I pray your blood over them. I pray, Jesus, that you would reveal your heart for them and for those that they are in relationship with, that they are struggling with, God. I pray that you would bring the right people, the right resources, the right community to come around them and speak truth and life and encouragement, God, that they'll be able to walk through this and experience freedom in you. They'd be able to walk through this and give testimony of your faithfulness. Lord, that they would be able to declare that you are good and that you are with them. I pray that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Love you, Robin.
Love you too.
You are a gift. All right. Until next week, ladies, we will talk to you soon. Thank you for joining us today. Honey in the Rock is a ministry of Grace Church in Oceanside, California. Follow us on Instagram and join our community at Honeys of Grace. If today's story encouraged you, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Remember, God is always working for our good, even if we don't see it. Until next time, may you find sweetness in your journey.